This wasn't just a garden. It was an act of defiance against corporations that literally owned your dinner. They fled the cities to escape war and poisonous food, but what they discovered in the dirt was the forgotten blueprint for survival. The Great Escape. How do you start a revolution? In the late 1960s, it wasn't with a bang, but with a seed, a patch of dirt, and a Volkswagen bus pointed toward the middle of nowhere. This wasn't just a garden. It was an act of defiance against corporations that literally owned your dinner. They fled the cities to escape war and poisonous food. But what they discovered in the dirt was the forgotten blueprint for survival. The post-war dream of suburban conformity and chemical efficiency was shattering. Young people looked at the food in the supermarkets, mass-produced, plastic-wrapped, and sprayed with toxins, and saw the same poisoned culture that had produced the Vietnam War. The same napalm that burned forests overseas was reflected in the chemical sprays coating suburban lawns at home. They realized that to change the world, they couldn't just protest. They had to be self-sufficient. This impulse was the heart of the Back to the Land movement, a great escape fueled by idealism and the desire for purity. Thousands of disillusioned youth traded their city apartments for abandoned farms or cheap marginal acreage, determined to reject consumerism and build a new parallel society. They sought immediate connection with the earth, knowing that the quality of their food, their water, and their community would determine the quality of their lives. It was an act of both resistance and creation, declaring independence not just from the government, but from the industrial food complex itself. For these radical pioneers, the garden was the first, most essential brick in their new utopia. But before a seed could be planted, these inexperienced farmers needed to learn the simplest, most profound lesson about the earth. Nothing is ever truly wasted. They had to learn to embrace the rot and the decay, because the first act of defiance was worshiping their own garbage. The religion of compost. In a society built on new, clean, and disposable, the most radical act for the hippies of the 1970s was to worship their own garbage. The modern world preached throwing things away, but the Back to the Landers understood there was no such place as away. Their first lesson in self-sufficiency was the compost pile, which became a philosophical monument as much as a source of fertility. Composting was a rejection of the petroleum-based chemical fertilizers that fueled industrial agriculture. Why buy factory-made food for the soil when your own kitchen scraps, manure, and garden waste could be transformed into black gold? Communes built massive steaming piles, often 6 feet high or more, that needed constant tending, turning, and aerating. These were living, breathing monuments, often steaming in the morning frost, humming with microbial heat, and requiring constant turning, a physical penance against waste. This was the work of constant involvement, a physical commitment to a closed-loop system where nothing died without immediately contributing to the next cycle of life. By religiously composting, they were creating the richest, most biologically active soil possible, ensuring that the vegetables grown were not only clean, but bursting with natural vitality. The compost pile was the beating heart of the community, but the true brilliance of their farming came from how they planted those new seeds, not in sterile rows, but in a productive, beautiful, and deliberate mess. The no-work garden. The 1970s suburban yard was a sterile green carpet, demanding constant mowing, weeding, and chemical spraying. The commune garden was the exact opposite. It was a productive, beautiful, and deliberate mess. This approach was a calculated rejection of monoculture, the industrial practice of planting long, rigid rows of a single crop, which depletes soil and invites pests. Instead, the communes rediscovered polyculture, an ancient and radical idea where diverse species grew together in intentional chaos. They revived techniques like the Three Sisters, planting corn, beans, and squash together, where the corn provided a trellis for the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, and the squash offered ground cover to suppress weeds. This biological teamwork meant the garden did much of the work itself, leading to the name no-work gardening. The plants protected one another from pests, shared nutrients, and maximized the output of a small space. This commitment to letting nature dictate the design saved labor and eliminated the need for chemical intervention, creating an interdependent ecosystem that was both sustainable and incredibly lush. The messy symbiotic garden was the foundation of their diet, But the revolutionaries knew they couldn't trust the outside world for the most basic ingredient of all, the seed, the ark of seeds. They weren't just saving seeds from their best tomatoes, they were saving stories. In an era of new, sterile hybrids designed for shelf life, communes became accidental librarians for plants on the verge of extinction. The industrial farming model favors monoculture, which requires uniform seeds that ripen all at once. Seed companies pushed hybrids that were often weaker, requiring more chemical support, and critically, their seeds could not be saved, forcing farmers to buy them again every single year. The industrial model wasn't just about weaker crops, it was about patents. Buying hybrid seed was like renting the right to eat. The hippies saw this as a sinister plot of dependence. In response, they deliberately sought out heirloom varieties, those seeds passed down through families for generations, valued for their superior flavor, nutritional content, and adaptation to specific, regional climates. Communes painstakingly learned the art of seed saving, meticulously harvesting, drying, and storing the seeds from the strongest, tastiest, and most resilient plants. This was a radical act of genetic preservation, ensuring their food supply wasn't tied to the whims of corporations. Every seed packet represented a commitment to independence, a tiny ark carrying the diversity of nature into an uncertain future. This passion for pure, organic growing was taking root in small pockets across the country. But in Tennessee, one commune was about to scale this garden philosophy up to a monumental societal level. The vegan super commune. In 1971, 300 hippies on school buses left San Francisco for rural Tennessee. Their goal wasn't just to live on the land, but to build an agricultural society based on spiritual principles and zero animal products. This was the birth of the farm, perhaps the most ambitious and large-scale agricultural experiment of the hippie movement. Led by Stephen Gaskin, the community embraced a strictly vegan diet, rejecting the concept of raising and slaughtering animals. This meant their food supply had to be hyper-efficient, nutrient-dense, and entirely plant-based. They cultivated vast fields of soybeans long before tofu and soy milk were household staples. The communards developed complex methods for processing soybeans and soon created the farm soy dairy, producing their own soy milk and what they called ice bean dessert. They didn't rely on outside sources for protein, they generated it on a truly massive communal scale. This work was a powerful, practical demonstration that a large population could be sustained entirely by organic, non-chemical farming, relying only on the black gold of their massive compost piles to replenish the earth. The farm proved that organic self-sufficiency wasn't just a garden hobby. It could be a blueprint for a healthier society, and the design of their buildings reflected this same utopian efficiency. The greenhouse in the dome. Buckminster Fuller's futuristic dream of a geodesic dome found its true home, growing tomatoes in the muddy backwoods of Oregon and New Mexico. For the commune movement, architecture had to serve the garden. The dome, with its perfect semi-spherical structure, was not just a cheap house, it was the ideal solar greenhouse. Its unique geometry meant it could maximize the absorption of the sun's low winter angle, trapping heat and light with unparalleled efficiency. Communards utilized this design to create enclosed, climate-controlled spaces for seedlings and vulnerable crops. By using locally sourced materials, often scavenged lumber or repurposed plastics, to build the interlocking triangular frames, they created large, inexpensive structures that acted as year-round environments. These domes allowed communes in colder climates, from the Pacific Northwest to the chilly plains of the Midwest, to extend their growing seasons by months, enabling them to harvest fresh greens and vegetables, even when the outdoor soil was frozen solid. The dome greenhouse became a powerful symbol of utopian design, meeting agrarian necessity, proving that technology could serve nature, not dominate it. The domes gave them physical shelter, but the philosophical quest for a pure connection to the earth led many communards to view their daily farm tasks not as labor, but as profound spiritual practice. Zen and the art of weeding. For the commune movement, digging in the dirt wasn't just labor, it was a profound spiritual practice, connecting the human body directly to the cycles of life and death. The 1970s brought a massive influx of Eastern philosophical concepts like Zen Buddhism and Taoism to the American counterculture. The garden became the most accessible place to practice these ideals. Instead of seeing weeding as a tedious chore, communards viewed it as a form of meditation, a focused, repetitive act that quieted the mind and fostered a deep, non-verbal connection with the land. They were heavily influenced by texts like Masanobu Fukuoka's The One Straw Revolution, which advocated for a do-nothing approach to farming, relying on observation and natural processes over technological intervention. This spiritual connection gave them immense patience, allowing them to accept crop failures as lessons, not defeats. The garden was the ultimate place of consensus, requiring them to work collectively and humbly, where a trowel and a patch of earth were more powerful than any guru. While the garden provided the foundation for their food, the communards understood that the richest sources of nutrition weren't always planted in neat rows, but were already growing wild just beyond their fence lines. The garden fed their spirit, but what if the most powerful medicine and richest food source wasn't planted in rows at all? What if it was already growing, waiting to be found? The Wildcrafting pioneers. Why struggle to plant carrots when the forest was already a grocery store? The commune dwellers didn't just live on the land, they learned to live with it, unlocking the hidden pantry of the wild. In their quest for complete self-reliance, communards turned their attention from cultivated rows to the tangled woods and overgrown meadows. This practice, known as wildcrafting or foraging, was about radical immersion in the local ecosystem. They studied field guides and relied on old-timer knowledge, rediscovering the nutritional and medicinal properties of plants that had been dismissed as weeds by modern society. Influential books like Ewell Gibbon's Stalking the Wild Asparagus became essential texts. They learned to identify edible mushrooms, harvest wild berries, tap maple trees, and gather nettles for iron-rich teas. This practice was essential for survival, providing protein, vitamins, and minerals that their young gardens couldn't yet supply. Wildcrafting was a profound statement. It proved that nature provides for those who know how to look, reinforcing their independence from the commercial food chain. This knowledge was vital, but the harsh reality of their great escape soon taught them that idealism and good intentions alone could not always conquer the ruthless arithmetic of nature. The Eden that froze. Not every seed sprouted. The romantic dream of self-sufficiency often met the brutal reality of a northern winter, a summer drought, or the total crop failure that threatened to starve the entire community. Idealism alone could not conquer the ruthless arithmetic of nature. Many well-intentioned communes, established by people with little to no farming experience, learned their most painful lessons the hard way. They quickly discovered the critical differences between good soil and marginal land, between planting a few vegetables and sustaining 25 people for a year. The first year on the land was often a desperate race against the clock, fighting late frosts, unexpected pest infestations, or simply miscalculating the amount of food needed. A late blight could wipe out an entire potato harvest, forcing communards to rely on meager foraging, or worse, return to the capitalist system they had fled to buy store-bought food. The sight of hundreds of withering tomato plants, their collective future, was demoralizing. They learned that a single week of early frost could mean months of starvation and the collapse of the entire project, forcing them to swallow their pride and face the market they had sworn to leave behind. Yet, each failure was a forced education, demanding humility and a deeper study of agronomy. The experience of hunger taught them resilience, forcing them to become experts on local climate and soil science, and ultimately leading them to realize that their survival couldn't depend solely on what they could grow for themselves. From commune to co-op. The revolution had a problem. It needed to pay the property taxes. The solution was simple, ingenious, and it changed how America shopped for food forever. The communes were highly successful in one area. They grew too much. In the summer, they were often drowning in surplus zucchini, tomatoes, and corn. They couldn't eat it all, and they couldn't stand to waste it. Initially, they bartered their extras with local farmers for equipment or services. Soon, they set up simple roadside stands, offering their pesticide-free produce to the mainstream world they had rejected. This informal exchange quickly evolved into the food cooperative movement. A co-op wasn't just a store. It was a non-profit business owned by its members, designed to bypass the traditional corporate food distribution chain. Communes supplied the organic goods directly to these urban co-ops, which provided access to clean, affordable food for city dwellers. This created a viable economic model that allowed the back-to-the-landers to sustain their lifestyle, proving that the counterculture could thrive not just through gardening, but through ethical commerce. The shift from simple roadside stand to organized cooperative bridged the gap between the radical rural experiment and the urban kitchen, setting the stage for a new kind of chef who would build an empire on these exact principles. The godmothers of farm-to-table. Ever wonder where your $20 avocado toast or farm-to-table menu really came from? It started not in a polished kitchen, but with a muddy pair of boots and a philosophy born in 1971. The fundamental truth championed by the communes, that fresh, local, organic food simply tastes better, was about to be translated into high cuisine. Chefs, particularly on the West Coast, began visiting these co-ops and farms, stunned by the intensity of flavor in produce that hadn't traveled 2,000 miles or been grown with synthetic chemicals. One of the most influential figures was Alice Waters, who established her legendary restaurant, Chez Panisse, in Berkeley, California. She wasn't a communard herself, but her entire culinary empire was built upon their core idea, a menu dictated entirely by what was harvested that morning. Waters and her peers showed the mainstream public that food was more than fuel. It was an experience tied directly to the season and the soil. This movement transformed the way America thought about quality, turning the hippies' rejection of commercial food into the farm-to-table movement that now dominates dining culture. This new appreciation for the simple, organic harvest was powerful. But the most radical minds of the movement weren't content with just a beautiful annual garden. They wanted to build a garden that would last forever. The permanent garden. They didn't want to just build a garden. They wanted to build an ecosystem that would feed them and their children forever. This goal led to the genesis of permaculture, a portmanteau for permanent agriculture. The concept was simple, yet revolutionary. Rather than fighting nature by tilling and replanting every year, they would design the landscape to function like a self-sustaining forest. Communards studied natural processes, utilizing techniques like hugelkultur, burying large, decaying logs to retain moisture, and planting multi-story food systems. The classic food forest contained tall canopy trees like pecans or walnuts, mid-level fruit trees like apples, shrub layers of berries, ground covers of herbs, and underground root crops. Once established, these gardens required minimal intervention, no tilling, little weeding, and no chemical input. The plants worked together, supporting the soil and maximizing productivity for decades. Permaculture was the ultimate expression of the hippie ethos, creating abundance through intelligent, long-term collaboration with the environment. This intellectual approach to permanent design was balanced by the daily practical reality of communal work, where the garden served not only as a food source, but as the ultimate form of group therapy. Gardening as group therapy. For many communes, the most important thing they grew wasn't corn or squash. It was a consensus. In a communal living situation where dozens of strong-willed people shared every resource and chore, conflict was inevitable. The garden, however, became the ultimate tool for group therapy and social cohesion. It was the central hearth, the place where decisions about survival, like when to plant or how to divide the harvest, demanded immediate cooperation. Unlike city jobs that isolated people, gardening required constant physical collaboration. Weeding a row of beans together, or lifting a heavy irrigation pipe forced open communication and compromise. When someone shirked their duties, the consequence was visible in the wilting plants, a problem that affected everyone. The shared vulnerability of relying entirely on the soil meant that personal dramas had to be set aside for the greater, greener good. The garden was where they learned to resolve conflicts through action, understanding that the health of their community was directly reflected in the health of their food supply. This cooperative spirit fed their souls, but their quest for year-round independence required them to conquer the dark, freezing months using nothing but ingenuity and the power of the sun. The solar greenhouse. Before solar panels were on every roof, 1970s homesteaders were already figuring out how to harvest the sun. using nothing but old windows, stone, and dirt. For communes in northern climates, the idea of fresh winter lettuce was a distant dream, but they found a solution in passive solar design. They built the solar greenhouse, often digging a deep pit into the south-facing side of a hill. The earth itself provided natural insulation, protecting the crops from freezing air temperatures. The entire south wall was covered in glass, often salvaged window panes, to maximize the low winter sun exposure. Inside, they strategically placed materials like water barrels or thick stone walls to act as thermal mass. These objects absorbed the sun's heat during the day and slowly radiated it back into the greenhouse at night, keeping the temperature stable well above freezing. This brilliant low-tech architecture allowed them to produce herbs, leafy greens, and even root vegetables throughout the coldest months, a true triumph of ingenuity over dependence on fossil fuels. It was an essential step toward achieving year-round food security. Though many of these utopian communities eventually dissolved, their core ideals didn't vanish. They simply changed clothes and migrated into the mainstream culture we see today. The new homesteaders, the communes may be gone, and the Volkswagen buses replaced by Subarus, but the revolution they started is far from over. In fact, it might be happening in your own backyard right now. The physical structures of the 1970s communes largely faded away, undone by internal conflicts, financial woes, or the sheer difficulty of self-sufficiency. However, the ideas they pioneered migrated into the mainstream, shedding their radical reputation to become core tenets of modern eco-culture. Today's urban gardeners cultivating tiny plots, the resurgence of farmers' markets, the demand for organic certification, and the widespread interest in permaculture design are all direct, recognizable descendants of the Back to the Land movement. The communards failed to build a permanent, alternative society, but they successfully changed the way the mainstream society eats. Their legacy lives on every time you see a backyard chicken coop, a community-supported agriculture program, or a family meticulously saving heirloom seeds. The desire for clean, locally sourced food, economic independence, and intimate connection with nature is more potent and necessary than ever. The garden remains the ultimate political space, proving that the greatest act of rebellion isn't a protest sign or a political speech, but the simple, enduring act of growing your own food. The question they asked in the 70s is the same one we face today. Who owns your food? Whether you have 10 acres or just a window box, the act of planting a seed is still the most radical, hopeful thing you can do. The communes failed, but their revolution won the supermarket war. If you found the blueprint for a better future in this story, make sure you hit subscribe. That's the best way to support the channel. And if you've ever planted a single seed in your life, please give this video a like.